You've probably picked up the idea that we take truth pretty seriously. We talk about the Torah being true and its values being true. And you are surely aware that there are people who want to take the whole idea of truth and put it in question. Sometimes they say something like this: well, you have your truth, and I have my truth, and they have their truth. But truth with a capital T, truth is supposed to be for everybody, truth that determines what the world is like. Nope, they're just different people with different truths. Sometimes the words objective, real, universal, absolute are used with respect to truth, and these people say all of that is unjustified. Really? There's only your truth, and my truth, and his truth, and her truth. I would say the most extreme form confronted me when I was in South Africa about 10 years ago. After giving one of the 3 hours of shiurim on the night of Shavuos, a fellow came up to me and said, "Rabbi, what are you trying to do? You're trying to use logic to convince us that the Torah is true. Don't you know that logic is just a Western cultural form?" Today they would say it's white privilege, along with 2 + 2 is 4. It's just a Western cultural form. And there are other cultures and other forms. And the forms are only conventional, socially created. So they don't have any real validity. And he said, don't try to use logic to contradict me, because I just showed you that logic isn't valid. Well, I had, a few months before, read the book The Last Word by Thomas Nagel, who is one of the world's best English-speaking philosophers. So I said to him this: tell me something. Are you trying to use logic to disprove logic? Well, if you're using logic, then I can answer you in logic. But if you're not trying to use logic to disprove logic, what are you doing? Offering me money? Playing the saxophone? Leave me alone. If you're not going to use logic in discussing something with me and getting my response, why should I talk to you? Well, he wasn't expecting that kind of an answer from someone with a fur hat, which I was wearing at the time, and he retreated. One of the things that Nagel and others point out is that the whole activity of discussion is based on logic. If you open your mouth to say something and expect somebody to answer you and want to try to come to some conclusion, if you're not using logic, why should he listen? What are you trying to do? Propagandize him? Hypnotize him? Smother him? Why should I stand for that? Why should I participate in that? So an attack on logic can't be an attack on the whole institution, because what are you going to use in your attack? If you're not going to use logic in your attack, nobody has any reason to listen to you. But let's take a look at the idea of truth. Obviously, if the idea of truth is just his truth, her truth, their truth, not anyone's truth, then the whole position of the Torah is undermined. But not only that, a lot else is undermined as well. So I want to give you 3 thoughts about this idea, and then we'll stop and we'll discuss them and see how they strike you. First thought, thank you very much. I'm going to talk to someone who represents this group, who thinks there's only his truth, your truth, their truth. I want to ask him a question. I have 2 people, Peter and Paul. Peter comes from a society a culture, a nation, an area that believes that the earth is round, and they believe that if you start at the equator and go due west for 25,000 miles, you'll come back to where you started. That's Peter and his culture. Paul and his culture believe the earth is flat, and therefore they believe that if you start at the equator and go straight west for 25,000 miles, you'll fall off the edge. Two cultures and two truths, according to you. Okay, now, I'm going to take Peter and Paul on a journey. We're going to start at the equator, we're going to go due west. Paul doesn't want to come along, but I have a gun. So here we go. The three of us are marching off, due west at the equator. You, who don't believe in truth, you who think that there's only his truth and their truth, you tell me what's going to happen. What's going to happen when the three of us go marching straight due west on the equator? Are you going to say, well, Peter, who comes from a culture that believes the earth is round, he indeed will go all the way around and come back to where he started. And Paul, who comes from a culture who says that it's flat, he will fall off the edge. Is that what you're going to predict will happen? I think if you predict that, that's the time to end discussion and, go get a bourbon or something. If that's what you think is going to happen, then you're hopeless. Obviously, only one thing can happen. And if you say that both of them will go all the way around to come back to the point of origin, then how can you explain to me that you chose Peter and his culture's truth over Paul and his culture's truth to predict the outcome? What made one superior to the other? That you chose one over the other? I don't think this person, whom we can call the relativist, has an answer to that question. I think that's bad for him. He can't answer that question. He can't make sense out of what he's saying. That's thought number one. Thought number two, which is similar, but has a different impact. People sometimes change their minds. You may have read about this. Maybe it even happened to you once or twice. People change their minds for various different reasons. One reason that people change their minds is they had a thought, they were living with it, it's part of how they deal with the world, and things weren't going well. Things were failing. Things didn't work out the way expected. So they examined themselves and said, listen, how am I dealing with the world? I got these A, B, C, D, E. Now this went wrong, and that went wrong, and that went wrong. I wonder, what's wrong? He said, I'll bet it's D. Mm-hmm. I think that D's the problem. And he then says, okay, I'm going to scrap D. What will I put in its place? I'll put in Q. I'll put in Q and let's see what happens. And then things go better. So when he replaces D with Q, he thinks he's made progress. He's in a better position than he was before. He may even say to somebody else, listen, if you're using D, let me tell you something. I used to use D, but I think Q is much better. And I'm offering to you the idea that you should replace D with Q, right? Now, from the point of view of the guy who says, no, there's only his truth and her truth and their truth, also, there's only the truth I had last year and the truth I had this year. It's just two truths. Why should I think that I'm making progress, that I'm better off when I'm trading one of my truths for another of my truths? Which one has the claim to superiority if all you have is his truth, their truth, and also the 1962 truth, and the 1984 truth, and the 2007 truth? They're all just truths. I don't think how he can explain how people change their minds. When they change their minds and think they're better off, when they have better ideas in their minds, I don't think he can explain that. So that's two things that I think that the person who doesn't believe in truth is going to find difficult. Maybe I'll stop here before I go to the third one. The third one's quite different. So are we together? I think he's going to have trouble explaining what he means. He's going to explain how his position works. Now, as a third thing, this became very popular in the 20th century and it's still being used. When you have an idea, a principle, a rule, a proposition, and it talks about the world, sometimes you could take that idea and turn it back on itself and ask, what does it say about itself? And check whether it comes out coherent or not. I'll give you an example. Suppose somebody says, all rules have exceptions. You see, people don't have all the information, and sometimes their logic isn't correct. So when you make a rule, it's not going to be perfect, which sounds, fairly reasonable. All rules have exceptions. Now let's think. All rules have exceptions. Is that a rule? Sounds like a rule. Tells you what happens. All rules have exceptions. So now I want to ask, what happens to this rule? The one we're using, the 4 words, all rules have exceptions. What about that? Does that also have exceptions? If all rules have exceptions, and this is a rule, then this one also ought to have exceptions. If it's really true that all rules have exceptions. Okay, let's try to work this out. What would an exception to the rule, all rules have exceptions, be? It would have to be a rule with no exceptions. This thing says all rules have exceptions, and we say it's not perfect. No, nothing's perfect. Everything has failures. What would a failure be? It would be a rule that doesn't have exceptions. So the starting proposition, all rules have exceptions, implies that itself is false, that there are some rules that don't have exceptions. That's not a good position to be in, where the proposition you are putting forward for people to examine and accept says of itself that it's wrong. That's not a good proposition. And there's a lot of that in the 20th century. Logic, mathematics, science, and even, according to some, in biology. Okay, let's try it over here. There is no truth, capital T, objective, universal, realistic, absolute truth. Really? None at all? How about what you just said? There is no absolute, universal, objective truth. What about that one? Is that one true? Well, if there aren't any at all, then that one also ought not to be true. But if that's your position, which is consistent, right? But then I want to know, why are you so excited about getting everyone to agree with you? Why are you calling people who disagree with you, putting forward tyranny and coercion and cultural appropriation and all the other bad things you say? Why do you think of them as colonialists? They have what they have, and you have what you have, and none of it's true. So it's just what you have. So why are you upset with them? And if you take the other way out, okay, I said all. Maybe I should have been a little more cautious. There are no universal, objective, realistic truths except this one. This one I just told you. This one really is, and all the other ones aren't. But then, how do you explain why this one's different? And if this one's different, who told you there are other ones that are different? How do you draw the line? I think at that point, your position looks arbitrary, self-serving. What I say really means it, and none of you guys have it. It doesn't sound like it has any explanation as to why it would be that way. So here, too, this is a third problem. Someone who says there is no truth, he can't give an account of his own proposition without either undermining his activity of trying to convince people and getting them to accept it, or taking a position which just is self-servingly accepted, mine is good and everybody else is bad, without any explanation. And neither of those is a good position to be in. I think the opposition to truth is hopeless. It's hopeless. This isn't a toss-up. It isn't a you have your idea and he has his idea. I think it's a non-starter. By the way, it was maybe 8 years ago, I went to speak at UCLA, and I was going to speak about some other topic. And the person who works there said, by the way, I want you to just know that the students don't believe in truth. Oh, I said, students don't believe in truth. UCLA is supposed to be a good school. So I used the first 10 minutes of my lecture talking about truth, and then I went on to talk about the other things. The students were fascinated with the first 10 minutes. Nobody ever talked to them like that before, because they very carefully guard who talks to them and what they say. And one student asked an intelligent question, and I answered him, and he was satisfied, and they walked out with a different opinion. So I think this idea that truth is relative is a non-starter, and it's something we don't have to worry about. We together so far? Okay, there's an app. Oh yeah.
Just a question regarding it. The argument from the other side might be like the truth is indeed objective, like one regarding the objective part, but everything regarding the subjective, such as like art, such as like opinion, such as morale, it's all indefinite and it's all just how would I say bias or some religious concept. So
Okay, so this is a very important response. It doesn't attack what I said, but it points out how far you can extend it. The person will say, yes, there is such a thing as truth, and in certain areas of life and thought, there is truth to be had, but in others not. And nothing wrong with that. That's just the way life is. For example, let's talk about aesthetics, great art and poor art and so forth and so on. Nothing true about that. You're just expressing your feelings, but there's nothing true about that. I don't mind, really, because if that leaves history open, certain things really happened. That's enough for us to build a real strong foundation. If the revelation at Sinai really took place, the world is a different place from what you think, and it has all sorts of consequences. So I really wouldn't worry about that. I think it's mistaken also. I won't get to that today, or only indirectly, but I credit that as a response that is sensible and should be dealt with it like that. I think that's a sensible response. One application of this, which I'm sure you've all heard of, is multiculturalism. Multiculturalism, now, these words mean lots of different things to different people. I'm reporting the way I've heard it. If you've heard it differently, I don't mind. No, I'm not here to tell you what to mean. The way I've heard it put, it has two components. First one is a prescription. Treat all cultures with equal respect. Criticizing cultures and trying to judge that cultures are better or worse, superior, inferior, is out of bounds. Not something that's appropriate to do. That's telling you what to do. Why? Why is it that you shouldn't criticize cultures or compare them and contrast them? Because, now here's the philosophical explanation, what criteria are you going to use when you evaluate which culture is better? Where's the criteria going to come from? It's going to come from a culture. If you're doing the comparing, then you're going to be using your own culture's criterion for comparing one with another. Let's suppose you're comparing your culture with another culture. Which one is superior? Well, if your culture produces the criterion and it gives you the result that your culture is good, the other one is bad, that's obviously just prejudice. You're just imposing your standards on them, and when they fail to meet your standards, you're judging them as inferior. That's not objective. That's not fair. Not realistic. And even if I'm using my criterion for my culture to judge the difference between cultures A and B, still, it's my criterion. I would have to ask how it would work with A's criterion, or B's criterion, or Q's criterion, and get a survey of hundreds of examples. That's not practical. So the idea is that since you have no neutral criteria to make the judgment is incompetent. Okay, those are the two pieces of what I think of when I think of multiculturalism. Now, if I asked you to think about this for a week, some of you would definitely figure out that those two pieces contradict one another. Let's try it again. The first piece was treat all cultures equally. Why should I treat them equally? Because it's impossible to evaluate inferiority or superiority. All evaluations will be prejudiced. Well, isn't the prescription to treat them equally based on an evaluation? I guess I should treat them equally because they are all equally valuable. They are all equally significant, important. But if I can't make any judgments, if I can't make any evaluations, I can't even make the evaluation of equality. If the second part is true, what I ought to say is this: I don't have any reasonable attitude towards the comparison of cultures, not that one is superior and the other inferior, not that they're equal. I can't say anything about it. Well, if I can't say anything about it, then who's to tell me how to treat them? Maybe I like this one better than that one. So why shouldn't I support this one and work against that one? Just because I like it. Why not? If you had a reason to think they were really equal, then you could tell me, listen, they're really equal. Treat them equal. But you don't have a reason for that. You have a reason for giving up all judgments altogether, all comparisons altogether. Equalities are comparisons. You can't say that either. If you can't say that either, then you can't give any instructions how to treat them. So I think that the two strands of the position of multiculturalism contradict one another. But leave that aside. Leave that aside. I want to test this idea to see whether it's reasonable. Now, I have a suggestion to you. If you ever are interested in discussing philosophical subjects, they talk about concepts that are very grand, very abstract, very august, concepts that you don't always talk about. Try to bring the discussion down to simple, practical examples where you feel comfortable that you understand the example and understand how it works, and see how these grand principles apply. Sometimes you'll get the surprise that they apply differently than you thought, and sometimes you'll get the surprise that you can't figure out how they apply at all. So let's try this. Products of one culture, criteria from one culture, can't be used to evaluate and to interpret another culture. Consider the following example. I'm visiting the South Sea Islands. The islanders there have a practice which is common in many places in the world. When they build a house, they all build it together. Someone needs a new house, the whole group gets together and builds a house. Now in this place, let's say it works like this. They put up the walls and the roof, and then they have tiles for the floor. And there's a quarry where they have tiles. And here's how they do it. Let's say you got 20 guys who are working on putting up the house. Yeah, 20 guys. They send down the 20 guys and say, bring up as many as you can. And then they tile the floor. If there are leftovers, they bring them back to the quarry. If there aren't leftovers and they need more, they send them down again to get more. That's how they do it. I'm watching this. I'm looking and I'm thinking, the tiles are all the same size. 1 foot by 1 foot. When they put up the walls, I'm going to take out my tape measure and measure the walls. Okay. And I do. And it's 6 feet by 8 feet. Okay. So now I say, you want to tile the floor? So I'm going to tell you what to do my way. Here's 24 of you. Each of you go down and bring back 2 tiles. They go down, they bring back 2 tiles, they put them on the floor. Magic! It fits the floor exactly. Wow. How did he do that? Well, because 6 times 8 is 48, and 48 1 by 1, so 48 square feet, and so forth and so on. Now, wait a second. Geometry was invented by Euclid in Greece, and mathematics goes back in Western culture and in China and other places. On the South Sea Islands, there's no geometry, there's no mathematics. So, is it going to fail because it's the South Sea Islands? 6 times 8 won't be 48? The tiles won't fit the floor? Of course they will. Somehow, a Western cultural product does apply to a non-Western culture. Well, let's try something else. I'm spending time in this island, and one day someone doubles over in pain, clutching his lower left abdomen. Terrible pain. I say, I recognize that. That's appendicitis. Fortunately for him, I never travel without my surgical tools, and I never travel without my anesthetic and my x-ray machine. I'll take a quick x-ray, and I'll see whether it is appendicitis, and it is. I do the surgery, I sew him up, and I relieve the pain and perhaps save his life. Oh, but wait a second. This scalpel was made in France, and the x-ray machine was made in Ohio, and the study of the appendix and the rest was done in Italy. This couldn't work on a South Sea Island, could it? These are all Western cultural products. But it does work, doesn't it? Now let's take another example, slightly less egocentric. In the 60s, when a lot of people went to India, Americans, some Indians came to America, the idea of meditation became popular. Meditation is used for various types of psychological results. A lot of Americans started practicing meditation, and a lot of them had good results. How could that be? Meditation is an Eastern cultural product. It's a cultural product from India and Thailand and Japan and other places like that. It was almost unknown in America. How is it possible for a cultural product from those areas to work over here? And yet, it did. Well, let's try another example. Let's try division of labor. There are cultures primitive cultures, where each person provides for himself everything. His housing, his clothes, his food, his weapons, everything. They're very poor. When you have division of labor and you have trade, you generate a gigantic amount of wealth. Do you think it's possible to go to a culture that doesn't have division of labor and to teach it to them, and they should learn it and thereby vastly improve their wealth? Well, it happened many, many times in the last 200 years when non-Western cultures imitated this piece of Western culture and became much, much more wealthy. How could it be, if it's a Western cultural product, that should be applicable to those cultures? So this is an example of what I say when I say take this grand philosophical principle and apply it to simple, everyday life and see if it works or not. We now have 4 examples where it doesn't work. That should make us suspicious. Maybe other things are different, like he said before. Maybe other things are different, but maybe they aren't. And now you should examine it with open mind and see whether they're different or not. Okay, let's try. Maybe 15 years ago, I was talking about various religions in the world. And I said the Eastern scriptures, like the Upanishads and the I Ching, have in them propositions that are false. And one of the students said, "You mean Western false? Western false. But you're using Western false to evaluate an Eastern text. Shouldn't do that. You should use Eastern truth, and maybe they'll come out to be true." Well, this sounds like what I said before about you have your truth and they have their truth. But now I want to come at it from a different angle. Do I have to apologize for using truth and say, oh yeah, I only mean Western truth? Let's see. Imagine this following absurd example. You go to inland China and you find out that they have a kind of competition. This competition takes place in a stream. People are on horseback and they have poles, and there's a piece of a lead ball in the stream. And the idea is to push the lead ball with your stick in the direction against the other team. So let's say they're upstream and you're downstream, and they come together with the sticks and push it. And the one that pushes it further wins the game. And it's in 2 halves, because the ones who are upstream and have the current of the stream in their favor, so in the second half, they reverse places. And you make how much ground they cover, and that's how you win. Okay, that's their game. And then they tell you, by the way, the name of this game is chess. Chess? Yeah, you've heard of chess, haven't you? Well, you have Western chess. We have Eastern chess. This is how we play chess. Well, sounds are free, letters are free, but the claim that you're using my word for your game, an English word for your game, sorry, the English word doesn't cover pushing lead balls with sticks on horseback in a stream. It just doesn't cover that. What's going on? We're talking in English, and we're talking about other cultures. So, of course, when we're talking English, we're using English words and English concepts. And we're talking about them. Why can't I use my concepts to talk about them? If in the Upanishads it says the earth is flat, it doesn't, but I'm just giving you an example. It says the earth is flat, and I say that's false, and somebody else says, you mean Western false, but it might be Eastern true, we have to ask why the word in the East would be our word true, because it clearly isn't true. They don't speak English. They're speaking Indian or Chinese. They say gobbly, gobbly, gobbledygook. Your dictionary says they're saying it's true. Maybe your dictionary is wrong. Maybe they're saying it's pleasing to the king. Maybe they're saying it's good for conversation over tea. Maybe they'll say it's a good mantra to put yourself to sleep. Who knows what they're saying? But if they're saying it's true, then it's something which is known to be false, and there's got to be a mistake. So when I say that something's true, I don't have to apologize and say, "Oh, I only mean Western true. I don't mean Eastern true." If the Eastern concept they're using agrees with mine, then it's appropriate to use TRUE to describe it because it's the same concept. And if it doesn't, then it's not TRUE, it's something else. And if it's something else, I don't have to give up my judgment that what they say is not true. It may have other virtues. They may not care about my concept of truth. That's possible. I don't think it is, but you can imagine it. I'm not telling them what to think. I'm not telling them what to believe. I'm just saying, pointing out that it's not true. Because TRUE is my word and my concept. I don't have to apologize for it. If somebody else wants to disagree with me when he's talking English, he has to talk my English, because that's the language that I speak. If he refuses to do that, we won't talk. That's all. But the pointed issue is, what should I say speaking English? The student was criticizing my statement that I made in English. And he says to me, you have to recognize that there are other concepts of truth. Why? Why do I have to recognize there are other concepts of truth? There are other concepts, but why should my word TRUE be used to describe them? Here's another example. Now, this bears on what you said about morality and values and ethics. Suppose the person in the other culture says, gobbly, gobbly, gobbledygook. I take up my dictionary and it translates as torturing small children for fun is morally permissible. Torturing small children for fun is morally permissible. Is that an argument about morality? Do they have a morality different from ours? And if their morality is permissible and our morality isn't permissible, I think what we would have to say is the translation is wrong, because this is such an obvious moral mistake. If they're intelligent at all, if they have any understanding at all, they wouldn't make a mistake like that. So we're not translating them correctly. That's not what they mean. And by the way, this happens to us in common conversation all the time. You're discussing something, and somebody says something to you, and you think, what? What? That's what he thinks? Can't be. Oh, so we're talking about justice. Maybe he doesn't mean the same thing I mean by justice. And then you say to him, tell me what you mean by justice. Why does that happen? Because if he means what I mean, he couldn't make that mistake. It's too obvious a mistake. And then almost always the person will say, well, I mean by justice fairness, and the other person will say, I mean by justice colorblindness. They're two different concepts. So of course we would disagree. We're not using the same concept. So when somebody says to me, other cultures might be different, there's a limit to how much difference I have to recognize, because I'm using my concepts and my words to describe the world, and there's no reason why I shouldn't do that. So at this point, there's going to be a limit to the kind of variation that we will accept, and that does set a certain boundary on what can be real. Yeah.
In terms of that example using for morality, some disgusting things that some people might do, or some truths they might have, or whatever it might be, a lot of people will make the argument that morality is attached to a religion or a god or something like that. So if somebody doesn't necessarily believe that, let's say for example the Torah is true, which would obviously say that what you said was a disgusting thing to do, what would you say to someone who says that that morality is just attached to religion and we don't have an inherent morality?
Well, one thing I would say is that morality is used to criticize religions. People's general morality is used, and people within the religion use morality, either to criticize or to build the religion. There are cases in Judaism where the outcome of a certain discussion is based on, since this and this is morally required, then that piece of text can't mean what you think it means, or that application to the law that you think is the application can't be the right application. The religion itself can use morality as part of its building blocks. That means morality which isn't explicitly dictated by the religion, but recognized by the religion, and we all recognize it as appropriate. So that's one thing. And then, as I say, take an atheist. Now this goes back. You said two things. There are people who think that religion has morality has to be tied to religion. Without it, there's no such thing as morality. Well, I think that I think that idea is wrong. I think it's colossally wrong on both sides. It's wrong to think that without religion there can't be morality. And it's wrong to think that with religion you're automatically guaranteed that there is morality. Both of them are wrong. Now, the academic world is full of mistakes and prejudice, but my field is philosophy, and I don't know in ethics. I haven't read all of ethics, but I've never seen anyone say that without religion you can't have ethics. At best, you have to prove that, and you have to prove it by some philosophical proof, of which I've never heard. Many, many philosophers and philosophies are trying to build the foundations for morality without God. They haven't perfectly succeeded. They made some progress. We know some possibilities are wrong. It's a matter of a continuous discussion. But the simple thought that if there is no God, there's no morality, that thought is not a thought that one can support. So I think that Abraham says to God says, I'm going to wipe out the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham says to God, if there are righteous people there, you can't do that. You can't do that. Shall the judge of the earth not do justice? Why doesn't God say back, Abraham, you forgot who you're talking to. See, it all comes from me, so you can't use it against me. It's my system. No, actually, the rules of morality can be used. When the verse says that God is just, it's not saying A is A. It's saying there's a concept of justice, and when you take a look at what God does, you'll see that what he does fits the concept of justice. So the idea that morality has to be dictated by a religion, you said something more general, and maybe the more general could be true, but to say that without divine dictation there's no morality, and with divine dictation there is morality, both halves of that are very, very questionable. So I don't think we have to start there. Okay, so now that means that when we're talking about cross-culturalism, we don't have to be embarrassed about using our concepts to describe another culture. You see an interaction between people in another culture, and you say that was unjust. No one can respond. It's another culture. You can't say it's unjust. They may not care about justice. They may not have the concepts to understand justice. That doesn't mean that my description is wrong. About 20 years ago, a book was written, and I had an interview with a student at Stanford, I believe, and she was asked about criminal actions against women in other cultures. In particular, let's say clitorectomy, where they just cut off the clitoris of little girls. So she said she had to think about it. And a few days later, she came back and she said, well, emotionally, it's horrible, and I feel sorry, but I can't judge another culture. There's nothing I can say about it. Well, I think she's wrong. I think we can judge another culture. I think those women are being brutally victimized, and that someone who would impose by force a stop to that kind of victimization would be doing something virtuous, even though it's another culture. Just because it's another culture doesn't make your judgments incompetent. Let's take out the standard, dusty, old example. And if the Nazis had different values, would that mean I couldn't criticize them? for genocide and wanting to dominate the world and so forth and so on. I don't think they had different values. But if they did, that would put them beyond criticism? I don't think so. I shouldn't hesitate at all to say that they're evil. Yeah. Oh, you have a question?
The question you partially answered it at the end. Question of historical concept. For example, different procedures were considered adequate, like in certain, like, for example, during the Christians in 15th century, it was considered normal to hang people on the street, or even as a public scene. But however, we as Jews, for example, we never adopted such views. We never accepted them, and so we were a fully integrated society. So the argument on their side would be, we view traditional conservative values as nonsense, as hanging people on the street.
We view them as what?
As nonsense, like same level of nonsense. Like we do not accept it, we do not integrate it. Same way as Jews or modern person would never accept hanging people out on the street. Or
Yeah. So let me see if I understand the point here. They'll be against our position, and we'll be against their position. Okay, that I understand.
They would argue, for example, you say there is like moral system, there is mind, different cultures. We cannot equalize them, and they could even agree with that and say, okay, you cannot equalize them, but at the same time we are in right, and we have historical precedents. When a group of people, for example Jews, never accepted the fact that you can just hang people on the street.
What has that? I don't see the connection. We didn't. First of all, our executions were public. They were not private. We had a capital punishment, and they were public. But let's suppose we didn't accept it. So what's that got to do with anything? That's just what we do. Maybe what we do is wrong. Maybe, we're not talking about what people do. We're not talking about the fact that people disagree. They disagree, and they do different things, and they have different attitudes towards history. We're talking about what can you call right and what can you call wrong. What can you call good and what can you call evil? I don't see what.
So they, for example, can say we can call evil what do currently in current society and fight against it, and it is our right and it's a proper way to do it.
But when are they speaking to us in English?
Yeah.
Okay, and they say it's their right to do so?
Yes.
Well, I said, listen, the concept of right in English works in this way. Rights belong to certain types of people, and they can give them up if they want to, and they can't be infringed by other people. That's how the concept of right works in English. If you're talking to me in English, then you have to talk to me in my language and mean what I mean. Otherwise, we're not communicating. You see, but in Arabic, it doesn't work that way. Good. So, if I'll learn Arabic, we'll have a discussion in Arabic. But right now, you're telling me in English what I should think in English about what you're doing. Well, I know how my concepts work, and they don't work that way. He has to use my concepts if he's going to communicate with me in my language. And I don't have to apologize for using my concepts to describe what he's doing. I don't see any reason why I have to apologize for that. Just like I use my geometry and my arithmetic and my appendectomy, and I use all of those things. Why can't I use my words and my concepts, and even my moral concepts? I don't see why. What? It's interesting. They say, so I'm a little skeptical about these things. They say there are cultures that don't have numbers. They count like 1, 2, many. That's it. Right? So, do they believe that 2 + 2 is 4? No, they don't believe it. They don't even understand it. It's not even part of their language. But they don't believe 2 + 2 is 5 either. They just don't have our belief. They don't disagree with our belief. They don't understand it to be able to say yes or no. So that is not to show that there's a different culture with a different mathematics. There are cultures without mathematics. That could be. But if the guy goes 1, 2, 1, 2, 17, I know he's not adding. He's not adding. He's doing something else. I don't know what he's doing, maybe, but he's not adding. Because when you add 2 and 2, you get 4, not 17. You just don't. So I don't have to apologize for using my concepts and my language to describe what they're doing. And that is definitely going to set limits on what can be described in my language as what they're doing. And it's going to set limits on the kinds of disagreements that we have with people. I'll give you one more example. Maybe I should have said this a half hour ago. Suppose somebody comes in and says, I have news for you all. There are no tables. Really? What? There are no tables. There just aren't. Now let's see. Is he drunk? Is he on drugs? Is he just joking? Is he just trying to make a splash, He's going to put it up on his Facebook account. There are no tables. Maybe by table he means radioactive stone? Radioactive stone tables? If he meant that, then what he'd be saying would be reasonable. There aren't any radioactive stone tables, as far as I know. So maybe if he means that when he says tables, then what he means is sensible, he's an intelligent person, and we can have a discussion about it. Change the meaning and you can communicate. But you don't say, oh, look at that. He comes from a culture where there are no tables in the world, anywhere, and we have a culture in which there are tables. You don't say that, because obviously there are tables. So it's not reasonable to say, well, he has his point of view. That goes back to the beginning. He has his truth that there are no tables. Please. Okay, you don't have to worry about cultural imperialism if you use your language and your concept to judge what other cultures are doing. Okay, so I think at least you see some of the kinds of attacks that are made against the idea of truth and the idea of objectivity and reality. Some of them are certainly incompetent. And I hope that will give you the confidence that when others are made and we are accused of imposing our view on others and so on and so on because we think we have a true picture of the world, that we don't have to give up. We don't have to be embarrassed. We don't have to give in. Okay, have a good Shabbos.